Ever feel like you're just drowning in news? Like you can't even keep up, let alone figure out what actually matters?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Well, that's exactly why we're here today. For this deep dive, we're cutting through all the noise and getting straight to the core of it all.
We're looking at everything that's happened recently through two really important lenses.
Right.
The immediate political fallout, of course, but also what kind of signals are we getting from economic forecasts?
Exactly.
So we've got a really fascinating set of sources for this one. We're going to be looking at some in-depth political analysis, but we've also got the latest economic outlook from BNY Mellon, a huge financial institution.
Having these different perspectives, like you said, is key to figuring out the big picture.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to understand what are the real consequences, both politically and economically, from recent events, and what could they mean for us in the near future.
What are the actual impacts that we should be watching out for?
Exactly. So let's jump right in. There's this whole thing that's been dubbed WhiskeyLeaks online.
Which is pretty catchy, I gotta say.
Yeah, it's very memorable.
It really is.
And this signal message scandal, I mean, it just keeps going. Doesn't seem like it's going to fade away anytime soon.
No, it really doesn't.
Especially with this Judge Boasberg.
Oh, yeah.
Remember him from the Venezuelan deportation cases?
Sure do.
Well, he's now ordered the administration to preserve all of those messages from the group of 18.
Ooh, putting them between a rock and a hard place.
Right, because now they risk being held in contempt of court if they don't comply or release information that is already causing, some serious public relations issues.
Yes, public relations nightmare.
For sure. But it is really telling that there is significant concern across party lines. There was this YouGov poll.
Oh, right.
And a full 74% overall, and this is important, even 60% of Republicans view this as a serious matter.
So even within the GOP base, there's a line they won't cross.
It seems like WhiskeyLeaks has crossed it. This isn't just like partisan bickering. This is a wider unease about how things are run.
It really seems that way.
So while all the legal stuff is happening, journalists are uncovering even more layers to this whole thing.
Yeah.
So Willamette Week reported that Joe Kent, and this is wild, Joe Kent, who has been nominated to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, so he's the intended person, but hasn't gone through the full Senate confirmation.
Right.
He was part of this text chain before his nomination was even confirmed.
So that raises some very serious legal questions about access to information, timelines, all that kind of thing.
Right, like who had access to what information and when.
Exactly. And if we try to connect that back to the bigger picture of governance and security, it really brings up this need to have proper protocols in place.
Absolutely.
When you have individuals who haven't gone through official vetting yet, and they have access to this kind of sensitive communication, it just creates so much risk.
Yeah. And then there's Spiegel International. They went deep into data security around all of this and found some wild stuff, like truly remarkable. It turns out that a lot of the key figures in this, we're talking Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor.
Right.
Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence.
Okay.
Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense.
Wow, big players.
Had major vulnerabilities in their personal data security.
Like what?
Like their phone numbers,
Okay.
their personal emails,
Right.
even passwords.
Wow.
All revealed through publicly available info.
I mean, it really makes you think about the judgment of the people in these roles.
It does.
If they can't keep basic personal data safe, how can we expect them to protect sensitive government info?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think the National Security Advisor would be a little more careful with his phone number,
I would think so.
So, legally speaking, it's still not likely that AG Pam Bondi's going to go for criminal charges. But that PR damage, I mean, that seems unavoidable.
And remember that YouGov poll, that public concern is showing up in the polls.
It is.
Waltz and Hegseth, their favorability ratings are down, and even Trump's approval is taking a hit.
And speaking of Trump, his stance on Mike Waltz has been, well, let's just say, evolving. He went from defending Waltz to, oh yeah, I always had my doubts about Mike.
Oh.
So it sounds like there's a real effort in the West Wing to push Waltz out.
Really?
And here's something really interesting. Jeffrey Goldberg's phone number was on Waltz's phone.
Oh.
Now remember, Trump hates Goldberg, especially after all that reporting on the war dead.
Right.
So that little detail could be a huge factor in Waltz's downfall. Trump could see that as a total betrayal.
Yeah, it's like the fact that it was that name is almost more important than the carelessness itself.
It seems like it. So switching gears a bit, but still in the realm of unexpected political moves, We have Elise Stefanik's nomination for UN ambassador suddenly withdrawn.
Now, this has got to be a big setback for Stefanik.
Yeah.
I mean, that UN role would have raised her profile significantly.
You would have.
Given her some serious foreign policy experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people saw it as a stepping stone to even bigger things. And to lose out on that, especially after giving up her House leadership position, it leaves her in a really tough spot.
So what happened? Well, some analysis points to the upcoming special elections in Florida.
Right.
That poll in FL06 showing Randy Fine in a much tighter race than expected, even in a district that's historically Republican. I mean, that has to be setting off some alarm bells.
Yeah, because if we connect that to the fact that the Republican majority in the House is already razor thin, any loss is a big problem.
Right.
And then on top of that, what if Republican voters see a close call or an actual loss as a result of supporting Trumpism?
Oh, interesting.
Then you might see more moderate GOP members in those swing districts distance themselves from Trump, even vote against the party line.
Yeah. And then you have the recent loss in that R+15 state Senate district in Pennsylvania. It really shows that no seat is safe right now.
No seat is safe at all.
And Stefanik's own district, NY21, is R+8.
Right.
If she left for the UN and that seat flipped, we could end up with an evenly split House.
So that scenario, maybe not the most likely outcome, but it's a big enough risk that the administration can't ignore it.
Yeah. So Stefanik, despite all her loyalty to the former president, is just another example of political expediency.
Wow.
So let's move on to what some are calling a war on federal employees.
War on federal employees.
Yeah, it looks like there's a longer-term strategy here, and it seems to be driven by people like Musk and Trump.
Okay.
And they want to shrink the federal workforce.
By a lot.
And the tactic might not actually be to win the legal battles that are inevitably going to come up when they try to do this.
Oh, interesting.
Instead, the goal might be to make it so hard and so costly to fight back against job losses that people will just give up and quit.
Ah, clever. So even if the courts later on side with the employees and order them to get their jobs back, the damage is already done.
Exactly. The disruption, the uncertainty. It's already achieved the goal of cutting the workforce.
That's pretty devious.
Right. We're already seeing some of this happening.
Oh, really? Where?
HHS, under Robert F. Kennedy Jr., announced plans to get rid of 10,000 jobs.
10,000.
10,000.
That's a lot.
It is. But what's interesting is that the commentary we're seeing suggests that this is more about PR and trying to weaken the agency's ability to do its job. It's not about actual reform.
So it's different from how real reform usually happens.
Exactly.
Which is more phased. You know, they follow the existing legal frameworks, and they usually rely more on natural attrition like retirements and resignations, not mass firings.
Yeah. The scale and the suddenness of these cuts make it seem like there's something else going on here, something more political.
I see.
And then there's Trump's executive order. This one is targeting federal employee unions, and it's going after their ability to do collective bargaining.
Wow.
Now, the whole basis of this order rests on what they're calling a novel interpretation of the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978.
1978.
1978.
That's a while ago.
It is.
So what was that act about?
It was supposed to establish merit-based hiring and provide certain protections for federal employees.
Okay.
But this new interpretation basically claims that any kind of union activity automatically interferes with how the government works.
So it's a very broad stroke.
Very broad and very aggressive. It wants to really cripple the power of federal employee unions. And it's interesting, the analysis raises the question of whether union leaders who supported Trump before, like the head of the Teamsters, will they wake up to this attack on their members' rights?
That's a good question. A very good question.
So let's talk about another area where we're seeing what's being called a war on women.
Oh, no.
Specifically when it comes to abortion rights.
All right.
And there are some really worrying things happening.
Like what?
Like what's going on in Texas with AG Ken Paxton.
Yeah, what's he doing?
He's trying to punish an OBGYN who's not even in Texas.
Oh, wow.
For providing abortion pills.
What?
And legally, it's questionable whether Texas law even applies to actions taken in another state.
Yeah, that seems a little shaky.
Right. But Paxton managed to get a judgment from a Texas court, and now he's trying to enforce it in New York.
And are they going for it?
No, New York is refusing to comply, which they should. This seems more about making a political statement than any real legal action.
It really does.
And then there's Georgia. They're thinking about a near-total abortion ban.
A near-total ban.
Yeah. And the analysis really emphasizes the negative impact these kinds of laws have on maternal health. Like, doctors may hesitate to do what they need to do even if the mother's life is in danger.
Because they're afraid of getting in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the most shocking story is this case in Georgia. This woman was arrested after she had a miscarriage.
Oh, my gosh.
And the coroner's report confirmed it was natural and that the fetus was not viable. But they still arrested her.
What?
They charged her with concealing the death of another person and abandonment of a dead body.
That's awful.
And she's still being detained. It's really disturbing. It shows this dangerous trend of how miscarriages are being viewed and how they're being criminalized.
I mean, the commentary makes a really good point here. Even people who oppose abortion, most of them believe in exceptions for rape, incest, or when the mother's life is in danger.
Yeah, that's pretty standard.
They don't want to imprison women who've gone through a miscarriage.
It's tragic. These cases suggest that there's a much more extreme, even inhumane agenda at play.
Absolutely.
And it forces us to think about whether what the anti-choice movement says it wants actually matches up with what's actually happening because of their policies.
Yes.
Because when you have policies that criminalize doctors, put women's health at risk, and threaten to jail women who have miscarriages, I mean, that's a war on women.
It is.
Now, let's switch gears again and talk about the power of visuals.
Okay.
Seeing is believing, right?
Huh.
And we're seeing some strong video evidence that's really shaping how people view things.
Like what?
Like the administration's approach to immigration.
Okay.
So DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, she went on this trip to El Salvador, and it was all filmed. And she's using these deported Venezuelans as a backdrop while she's criticizing immigrants.
Wow.
Now, the administration labeled these people as gang members.
Right.
But there's often not much proof to back that up, and there have already been legal challenges to these deportations.
So to use them as props this way, especially if they can be considered prisoners of war under the Geneva Conventions because of that making war justification they use for the deportation.
Right. It raises serious ethical and maybe even legal questions.
It really does.
And then we're seeing this increasing trend of targeting Muslim grad students.
What do you mean?
We've seen the arrest of this Iranian national, visas revoked for hundreds of others.
Wow.
But it's the footage of Rumesa Ozturk's arrest in Boston that's really sparked outrage.
What happened?
So they arrested her for, get this, allegedly glorifying and supporting terrorists based on an op-ed she co-authored in her college newspaper.
Okay.
And the op-ed was pro-Palestine.
Oh, wow.
And you see the video. She's arrested by multiple plainclothes individuals. Oh, that's got to be terrifying.
It is. I mean, people immediately thought it was a kidnapping.
I bet.
And the analysis here connects these arrests directly to an attempt to shut down dissent on college campuses. It reminds us of how student protests have affected administrations in the past.
Yeah, but like the commentary said, this kind of heavy-handed approach can actually backfire.
How so?
Well, it can lead to even bigger and louder protests once people see what's happening, and we're already seeing that in Boston.
That's true. Whether this strategy of silencing free speech will actually work in the long run, that's debatable.
Right, because, as the commentary suggests, these actions can lead to more anger. The dissent spreads wider.
It could reach a breaking point.
It could.
Right.
And the video evidence in Ozturk's case has really galvanized people. It sparked a huge public response.
It has. So let's move on to what the analysis calls Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude.
Yep. Focusing on Vice President J.D. Vance.
Oh, Vance?
Remember his photo op in Greenland?
Oh, yeah.
Didn't exactly go to plan?
No, it did not. The Greenlanders were actually open to meeting with his wife at first.
Oh, really?
But then as soon as Vance was added to the itinerary, they withdrew all the invitations.
Wow.
They saw it as a propaganda stunt.
Ouch.
They felt like it was about promoting the idea that Greenland wants to join the U.S., not about building any real connection.
Yeah, not a good look.
Not at all. And this ties into a larger skepticism about Vance taking over the so-called Meggie throne.
So people don't see him as the heir apparent?
Not really, and the analysis outlines 3 reasons why.
Okay, I'm listening.
First, there's this perception of him being weird.
Weird.
Yeah, and whether that image fits with what Trump wants in a successor.
Right.
Then there's the fact that Vance has shown some independent thinking. Remember his involvement in the Signal chat?
Yeah.
And then there's this interesting point. As vice president, he's basically unfireable.
He is.
So there's that lack of leverage.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about how the former president likes to operate.
Yeah, good point.
And then there's the comparison to Mike Pence's time as VP.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Vance is already getting assigned these kind of embarrassing tasks like the Greenland trip.
It's like they're sidelining him.
It seems that way. So to finish up, let's talk about something the analysis calls Freudenfreude. This time, it's about the Unification Church of Japan.
Unification Church.
Yeah, and there have been some interesting developments.
Bro, tell me in.
So it's been almost 3 years since Shinzo Abe was assassinated, and the assassin explicitly stated that he'd do it because of the Unification Church.
Right.
He said they were financially exploiting his family and that they had deep ties to the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party, which is the ruling party.
Right. I remember this.
So what's crazy is that the Japanese government actually investigated these claims.
Wow, they took it seriously.
They did. And they found out it was all true.
No way.
Yeah. So the government took legal action against the Unification Church.
Good for them.
And they won in court. So now the church is going to lose its tax-exempt status. And they have to give back all the money they got through these shady practices.
So justice was served.
It seems like it. And it's important to note that this isn't the first time the Japanese government has had to step in and deal with a religious group that was abusing its power and exploiting people.
Oh, really?
The analysis mentions 2 other times where they had to do something similar. And it's worth remembering that the Unification Church has a history of getting close to Republican presidents in the U.S.
Interesting.
With the exception of Gerald Ford, of course.
Of course.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear that all of these political things happening aren't happening in a vacuum. They're totally tied to the bigger economic picture. And the policies being made are creating a lot of uncertainty about the future.
What's really fascinating to me is how disconnected it all seems. We have these political actions like increasing tariffs, going after federal employees, cracking down on abortion rights. But then you look at the economic forecasts. A lot of them are predicting slower economic growth, higher inflation.
Which are a direct result of those policies.
Exactly. So it makes you wonder about the long-term consequences of all these interconnected trends.
It really does. I mean, we're seeing norms being eroded, the real effects of trade policies, the political landscape shifting.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what unexpected things might happen because of all of this.
It really does. What's going to come out of this mess that we haven't even thought of yet?
Yeah. It's definitely something we all need to keep in mind as we figure out how to navigate the days ahead.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.